Okay, so a few things to correct from the first episode of the Keter class Why You Wouldn't Survive. SCP actually stands for Special Containment Procedures, but Secure, Contain, Protect is the slogan. Also, SCP-001 isn't actually confirmed as a Gate Guardian, and has numerous other entries that disguise its true identity that is redacted. The guidelines for what I cover will be based on SCPs that are dangerous or deadly enough to warrant being included on this list from the Keter class. I was originally going to go up to 4,000, but realized by the time I was writing into the 2500s that the script was already 15 pages long. So today, we are only going up to 2,500. So as to not stall any longer for those people that have to click off a video after a minute because of short attention spans, we still have a hell of a lot of SCPs to cover. So let's get right into it. This time around, we are discussing Why You Wouldn't Survive the SCP Keter Class, Part 2, 2001 to 2500. SCP-2006 is a bastardized version of the saying, fear itself. Being a simple sphere 50 centimeters in diameter, it can manipulate its form in every way possible, from its shape to its chemical makeup to even its own voice. It does so in order to become an exact copy of any villain or monster in horror or science fiction written by man. It exists to cause fear in humans. That would be a terrifying ability to wield. Its perception of people's emotions tends to slow it down a bit, as it usually takes the form of Roman, a creature from the 1956 film Robot Monster, a not so intimidating being as it cannot gauge the actual fear of people too well. But considering there is no way of harming it in any capacity, and if it were to finally figure out the best means of fear-driven transformation without becoming friendly to those it tries to scare, it's very possible it could take the form of something, say, like Godzilla, and terrorize the populace unopposed, since it cannot be destroyed, and will retain the destructive factor of anything it takes the form of. SCP-2008 is probably the scariest for lore and history YouTube channels like my own, being an unseeable entity that has led to the death of 47 people in specifically Tennessee, with each one dying of injuries similar to gunshot wounds with no bullet to be discovered in their body. While most of the victims are ruled as suicides, 80% of them had some history working in some type of field associated with learning or teaching history. The only survivor of this unknown phenomenon is a man named Morton Richards, who details a forum post discussing past First Ladies, arguing if Martha Washington was the actual First Lady or if Rachel Jackson died of either a broken heart or good old American-made heart disease. The point is, Morton was attacked by what he described as a ghost with a gun after arguing the validity and logistics of something on the internet with somebody else.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit?
So basically this means somewhere out there is a forum peruser who, when he is told he is wrong or gets into an argument over something this user believes is right, will summon a ghostly weapon to gun you down to prove he is right. He's one of those Xbox kids that will literally kill you over an argument.
Hey man, it's probably just a glitch, dude. I wouldn't worry about it.
Lord have mercy, I'm gonna be killed by half of the comments of my comment sections on the Why You Wouldn't Survive series. SCP-2009 is The Last of Us, but less clickers and just more normal humanity, being normal human beings going about their lives without any abnormalities in physiology and expression. They will specifically name themselves Thomas Huang and have memories of their past life from childhood all the way up to adulthood. However, whenever one of these normal-looking human specimens are exposed to either high humidity or temperatures exceeding 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees in Fahrenheit for us Yankees for over 5 days, these particular individuals will seek out dark, cold places near areas of frequent human activity. Once accommodated, the SCP will have its body split apart into millions of tiny chitin-based hairs and attached to walls and surfaces, losing its sapience only to become a literal fungus producing airborne spores that, when these are inhaled, will cause a person to experience various symptoms, most notably their chemical and DNA makeup morphing their body to become exactly identical to Thomas Huang in every way, even down to their memories, forgetting everything about their life prior to their infection. To prevent this, the SCP organization literally burned any person named Thomas Huang alive to prevent more spores from being produced. So you can literally be turned into a Huang, effectively erasing your mind from existence just for breathing in a hot and humid area, or being burned alive to prevent yourself from spewing into a fungi-riddled mess. SCP-2032 is history in the remaking, as an elderly Middle Eastern man with no discernible age or detriment of age on his health, excluding mental degradation that causes his memories to slip further and further. The reason he stands as an SCP of the Keter class more than his age and health is that his memories directly manipulate the human populace, and whatever he remembers and believes to be true reflects on the general population's recollection of history. The reason this could be deadly for many reasons is simply because anyone could manipulate this nearly Alzheimer's-like man and convince him of a different history, which would unintentionally persuade everyone to follow suit. And with history altered, people's outlooks and opinions could be convinced enough to become violent to particular groups or even rekindle war efforts, leading to wide-scale murder and reckless attacks. SCP-204 is basically if BioShock's Big Daddy, holding the concept of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, had a baby with the killer nanohaze of Horizon, with SCP-204-2 being signified as a child between the age of 4 to 13 who has experienced abuse and trauma, often leading to developmental issues and mental disorders. SCP-204-1 will seek out these children, flying around as a hive of unseeable organic nanomachines that act as the child's protector. Whenever the child feels in danger, distressed, or simply demands an attack, SCP-204-1 will bind these nanomachines together to physically and visibly manifest in a form dependent solely on the child in question's state of mind and how wild their imagination can be, basically making a violent imaginary friend. This amalgamated creation will be extremely strong and will have an average level of intelligence, making for fierce opposition. But its true deadliness is the fact that it needs to feed on organic matter in order to regenerate itself if damaged in any way. It's thought that SCP-204-1 seeks out children with mental issues to manipulate their psychosis into killing others out of revenge or anger to feed more easily, as it can only do the bidding of each young master in order to feed. Once a child hits the age of 14, the SCP will act like a fairy godparent and abandon them to seek out a new child to follow. If, however, a child of age is not found, SCP-204-1 will manifest into a giant physical being and go on a violent rampage, attacking anything and everything nearby. So basically, you have this unseen being looking for children that may be prone to lean towards violent tendencies, or children disconnected from reality so that it may kill or harm others for them. And if it finds that child that fits the bill and is psychotic enough, you and many others could be at the tail end of a trial of slaughter. If it cannot find a kid, if you have not sacrificed a kid to give it the ultimate power of death and destruction, you could also be a casualty amongst its rampage over not being able to adopt. SCP-2068 is an extreme version of the picket sign Oil for Blood, being a reciprocal pump that houses a veritable biological computer with interconnecting organs that uses energy from the environment to manufacture hydrocarbon compounds and to make more versions of itself to expand its reach. In the hands of governmental and militarized powers, it can be used in oil wells to pretty much make a nearly infinite supply of fuel. However, those maintaining upkeep of this machine would very quickly display symptoms like degradation of the limbic system, the part of the brain used for expression and emotion, and lesions in the gastrointestinal tract, also leading to sudden profuse vomiting. Those affected will contaminate anything and everyone nearby unintentionally. Even if they are given immediate surgery to remove affected tissues, the virus will already have taken its course and even infected doctors and surgeons who held the surgery. When the contaminated personnel were placed in quarantine, each individual would attempt to break out using any means of chemical offense their body would allow, with even one person literally exploding like a boomer from Left 4 Dead in a bloody, biley mess just so it could break containment. Which this did show that people could literally mutate into explosive, poisonous, and incendiary matter. Those it affected and killed would reanimate as mindless zombies, literally becoming suicidal, spewing toxic acid, and exploding given the chance. All things considered, for the constant need of fuel and resources, many government powers could see to using SCP-2068 as a top-notch source of revenue, while also sacrificing anyone that takes up the offer to work there, becoming explosive zombies that work only to serve this reciprocal pump. SCP-2075 is a never-ending consciousness that uses human lives to keep itself immortal. It is a pathogen of microbial nature that can be exhaled by an invaded host, and once breathed in by a separate individual, will infect them to become part of this mental control. Whoever is the most original host of this infection is considered the SCP-2075, and whoever else it infects and controls as SCP-2075-A. If the original host body of SCP-2075 were to be killed, the person that it had infected will immediately become the primary host no matter the distance or location. Although it is only able to control one person at a time, it is able to communicate in numerous different languages, from Russian to English to even an unknown variant of Uralic. And it has personally stated to have lived for nearly 800 years, learning, developing, and taking control of who knows who in various parts of the world throughout a large portion of recorded human history. Using what it has learned about human nature and its ability wisely, it could easily infiltrate organizations by breathing next to high-priority targets, killing the original host, and doing this indefinitely till a desired body is attained. From there, any number of catastrophic tasks can be achieved by its own hand as it takes control of any person on our planet. Or maybe it already has. Now, before we get into 2075, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Audible. If you are wanting more information on the SCP organization itself, or many other SCPs that are easier to dive into, then the audiobooks of Tales of SCP are great to listen to as they go further in depth. You can get any of these audiobooks for free by visiting audible.com/staywow or text STAYWOW to 500-500. One of the best parts about it is if you just don't quite enjoy your audiobook, you can exchange it for free with no questions asked, as you listen to your audiobooks on any device, anytime, and anywhere. Audible is now offering 1 credit and full access to the Plus catalog every month. And that's on top of all the free Audible exclusives it has already. Heck, back when I was researching for my Why You Wouldn't Survive Minecraft's Overworld, I stumbled upon and listened to Minecraft The Island, written by Max Brooks. Yeah, the guy that wrote World War Z, discussing being transported to the blocky world. And on top of that, all narrated by Jack Black. Again, you can start listening with a 30-day Audible trial. Get 1 audiobook and unlimited Audible original monthly downloads absolutely free. Visit audible.com/staywow or text STAYWOW to 500-500 for more SCP goodness, or to listen to Jack Black try to survive the world of Minecraft. Now, let's get back to talking about some infections in the SCP universe. SCP-2079 is a bit complicated, but basically is numerous groups over history making a series of laws focused on a demon-like entity, so much so that it wills the entity titled Grokadis into existence. Those who begin writing these laws will randomly select from a pool of somewhere between 300 to 375 laws, and if any 50 of these laws are to be ratified, Grokedus will appear near the group as a beast covered in stiff black hairs, with a long snout containing powerful jaws, with no peering eyes whatsoever. Circling its mass are 29 levitating severed human hands. This creature will abide strictly to the laws provided thus far, whether it be beneficial or detrimental to it, like the law of sustenance, where in an act of semblance, the beast will be allowed to find up to 10 different people a day and catch them with its numerous hands, rip their skin off their bodies and their eyes from their sockets to feast upon them as if this were a dark prequel of Shrek. And in recorded history, this law was apparently made active for the Boy Scouts of America, and for a time, members would be flayed and their mutilated bodies left behind. Eventually, the beast broke the 10-person-a-day rule, and when it did, faded from existence. So it must follow the laws, and if it does not, it will disappear like a Thanos snap. Another example is the law of humility, where not only is it prohibited from entering places of worship lest it disappear, but if encountering a poor person on the street, will hand them a number of change or gold coins, pitying their situation. So depending on the 50 laws chosen out of the up to 375 possible, this monster could have unknown rituals, restrictions, and even powers that these laws impose on it. Meaning Grokedus could either help out mankind by giving us some good supplies or some cash, or could wipe out troves of men and women and children however it sees fit, as long as it's legal by the laws dictated. SCP-2086 are arthropods that look almost exactly in nature to public transport vehicles, most notably buses. Their average lifespans cap out at only 15 days, with their adulthood at the cusp of the 7th day. These bus theropods, I guess I will call them, the female ones can bear up to 20 offspring at 8 days of age, meaning if they are given the chance, will have their numbers spread sporadically in months. They can appear to drive around as any other bus we see, and within its inner workings looking like a typical bus interior, but the framework being purely organic. It can open its roofing to take flight at will, while its wheels can unravel in long black legs. To blend in with their environment and not cause too much alarm, they will make their nesting grounds in just about any scrap or junkyards they can find. And to not make themselves known while they are out and about, will use dead bodies of humans and prop them up in the driver's seat to not raise any alarms of any apparent self-driving bus. The young bus theropods will make routes and roads that lead directly to the junkyards as adults venture out to find people gullible enough to enter its innards. Once enough passengers are inside, it will release a chloroform-like gas to knock them all out, and either drive or fly back to the nest, where it will open up its carapace or the roof of the bus for the younglings to take the humans and insert them up their... I'm not kidding, they are inserting them up their sphincter, shoving people up their centipede short bus butthole shafts, where hair-like growths will penetrate the prey all over, draining them of every last drop of blood, and then fill the dead body with saline to preserve it in order to have the human body it needs to traverse roads without drawing attention. So if you rely on public transportation, make sure you're getting on the right bus, or you'll be a young crab car's butt food that will be drained dry, and then your dead body used as a Weekend at Bernie's-like body for adult cars to get around. SCP-2112. Wait, it's all 1970s rock band Rush? Always has been. With this SCP, anyone that hears the sounds emanated by an Origin CD made by the band Rush will want to make a cover band, and these cover bands that make this music will spread the infection to other non-musicians who all want to play like Rush, and only Rush, giving up everything in life to do so. So basically, you're gonna have a world of mediocre musicians playing Tom Sawyer at every bar and venue. Even Geddy Lee got sick of that song, maybe the world will collectively get sick of itself too. But with this infection, everyone will give up on everything in their life, even their survivability, just so they can play Spirit of the Radio. Side note, rest in peace, Neil Peart. There will never be another drummer like you. SCP-2131 identifies itself as Antipope Benedict XIII, despite Benedict having died in 1423, being dressed and acting in a way similar to that of one so devoted in their faith. However, this particular antipope has a special quirk. Every 16 hours, SCP-2131 will discharge a gamma-ray burst all around it, converting some of its own mass into antimatter, healing itself from any injuries, and even rejuvenating it from death. However, this antipope attempts to stop these events from happening by holding a daily prayer ritual with a 95% success rate. I guess Benedict should take some advice from Coach and pray harder. Anyone caught within this gamma-ray burst will suffer from severe radiation exposure because, of course, radiation has to be involved when it's an SCP, and will more than likely die in a short amount of time. It claims that back in the 1300s, armies of what Catholics considered pagans known as the Davites, a different kind of human that practiced rituals, cannibalism, and miracle working, who would steal the names and histories of important historical figures, were defeated by the Catholics. However, SCP staff note that the Davites had no record of being around in this particular time period, raising questions of the SCP's claim of being the historical figure Benedict XIII. Being in containment for long periods of time will cause it to attempt to harm itself to possibly make these gamma-ray bursts more likely of happening, causing further damage to everything nearby, although self-harm is frowned upon by the church, leaving more question to its true intents. And with this figure that can cause gamma bursts at time-specific intervals could cause sudden radiation attacks that it casually walks through or finds itself held in, and if you are nearby, will be keeled over in moments without a rad suit. It goes without saying that this ancient being may take the name and likeness of an important figure somewhere in our world, lure people in, and use this gamma ray to its advantage, while also using their identity to get the upper hand and kill more innocents. SCP-2162 is a literal sense of the phrase the silent killer, being a giant unseeable cloud of gases completely composed of nitrogen that do not act in the natural ways that gases do with environmental variations. Winds, air pressure, and physical barriers do not impede its steady march in whatever direction it travels in. SCP-2191 is a complex system of genderless vor leeches set in the forests of Romania, a temple deep within these woodlands hiding complex tunnel systems from millennia-old tribes, housing numerous human-like people. You may say I'm being a bit redundant, but the biological makeup of these discernibly mutated individuals shows their skin has developed into a cracked porcelain feel and appearance, while on the inside they lack all major internal organs except for their hearts, lungs, and brain stems, as well as any gender-specific characteristics like genitalia, breasts, or male/female figures. Despite their eyes being enveloped by their own flesh and becoming blind, they can react to light, as well as clicking constantly as a form of echolocation to traverse their environment, much like the clickers in The Last of Us. They do not age and are considered basically living corpses with extremely slow necrosis. They can become active between dusk and dawn, leaving the temple, each lone wolfing it through the forest to hunt down living human beings. They will look to paralyze you with a neurotoxin-tipped barb in their hands to do their sole purpose in existence, opening their mouth wide open to the point it unhinges, widening the throat to unleash a horde of lamprey-like leeches from its stomach to bite at the victim's neck, to administer a digestive enzyme into your body to liquefy your organs, muscles, and bones, literally turning your insides into mush in less than an hour. The temples they come from are lined with microscopic worm-like creatures that serve to enter the bodies of these SCPs to give them nutrition to supposedly keep them alive, with root-like appendages also lining the walls secreting corrosive liquids to further the tunnels beneath its temple, and are hypothesized to be sapient and controlling the human-like entities as they attach to them while they slumber. So it may be that these tendrils have created these people, leeches, and worms to feed its further burrowing deep into the earth. Historical records have shown these human creatures tend to hunt down people in the wake of tragedies like earthquakes and war, as people of the nations are fragmented, weak, and distraught, making for easier targets to swoop in on to feed upon. Meaning, if you survive the ravages of natural disasters and human conflict, these temple-dwelling, blind they/thems will seek you out to paralyze you and have you slowly digested from the inside out by tons of leeches for an unknown tentacle entity deep underneath the earth. SCP-2994 is basically just the series finale of Hoarders, fermenting as a blob of literal trash and refuse, mixed with fecal matter, bacteria, and other detrimental forms of waste. When refuse is thrown into this pile, it will grow in mass. If it is directly touched, a brown stain will develop on whatever made contact with it growing from its point of origin at 1 centimeter per hour. Birds and mammals affected by this will start to obsess over the stain, trying to remove it. However, trying to remove it by any means necessary will only double the amassed area. With this obsession, the stain will have no problem growing at an exponential rate, and once 33% of their body has been covered, the person in question will be able to spread the stain via contact, becoming carriers for the SCP. They will become completely unhygienic, hoarding any waste materials the SCP needs to grow itself, and will cover themselves in refuse and their homes in waste in order to accumulate it for SCP-2994. Typically, after 5 to 18 days, the afflicted individual will die due to waste materials accumulating in their lungs or suffering from blood poisoning. The SCP itself cannot be completely destroyed, as it can regenerate to remain at 10% of its form, even under constant flames. But its victims can be completely incinerated without issue. So basically, if you touch a piece of trash that's part of this SCP, and you'll get a big old doo-doo stain growing on you, and obsess over cleaning it, only making it worse, till it grows enough where you want to smear shit on yourself and the walls, and gather dead animals and trash in your home, till you die from unhealthy living conditions. Touching any birds or mammals or surfaces that they have touched will have you going down this route, and the only way to prevent you dying a literal shitty death is to be burned in a cleansing fire. I don't know about you, but I don't want to go out eating and smearing shit in my final moments.
From hell! It's from hell!
Actually, if that is your thing to go and smear and eat shit, you might want to go see a psychiatrist or contact your nearest SCP agency for a nice cleansing fire, because that shit is nasty as fuck.
Disgusting!
SCP-2271. If you think your student loan debt is bad, well, you have no idea. 2271 will administer white envelopes to numerous Midwestern Americans, with each note describing a hellaciously unpayable debt that will start to affect the psyche of the letter recipient slowly but surely, being attached to a company known as Factory Financial Management that cannot be contacted in any way, despite having a physical address and phone number listed. The debt attached to this letter will be physically impossible to pay off, even if you had the combined net worth of Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos' wife. Despite this, the recipient will obsessively try to pay off this debt, selling off all of their possessions, belongings, and homes to mail all of their accumulated money away. If you try and stop these recipients from selling their possessions or delivering the money to the designated address, they will become extremely violent and aggressive in return, stating they are going to be horribly reprimanded by a collection agency if they don't pay this off, even stating that mysterious, fast-moving shadowy figures will emanate in the peripheral of their vision. Much like paying off any debt in America, once you think you have made a decent dent to your total debt, you will notice that, the debt is 1 to 2% higher than before your initial payment. In an act of pure desperation, the recipient will start selling their own organs, teeth, hair, blood, and even friends and children just to make any headway on their debt. This will be a never-ending, more drastic cycle that will either have the recipient sell parts of their body so much so that they will die, or if the second debt payment is not made, the recipient in question will simply vanish without a trace soon after. These debts can make individuals, families, and groups of people fanatical who will attack anyone that may impede their payment progress, or even sell people into slavery, or even selling their organs on the black market. Any large-scale attempts at containing people or groups of people affected by this SCP will most likely also have this ill-fated letter delivered to those involved in containing them, exacerbating the situation to the point where those in debt will even set off a nuclear device just to free themselves and others from the shackles of payments. So, you'll either sell your body piece by piece until you die, instigate a fight that gets you killed over debt, have a race of foggy shadow people come to collect you for your deferments and wipe you from existence, assumedly, or straight up nuking everyone in debt to prevent further debts from accruing. SCP-2299 is if mob mentality and cancel culture was an infectious disease, a phenomenon apparently spurred by what spectators witnessed as a giant spectral octopus in the sky, where shortly after, any number of people between 4 to even 600,000 of the people within this city that it flies over will randomly be afflicted by a mental disease as it invades the brain, causing a lineage of drastic and changing symptoms in a short amount of time. Starting within the first 20 minutes, where you and those around you will have your motor skills degrade, with trembling motions all over, frequent bouts of short-term memory loss, and even near-fatal temporal lobe epilepsy, all while these individuals will refuse to divulge their symptoms whatsoever to anyone not closely related to them. Within 1 to 4 hours, there will be spikes of blood flow to the brain's amygdala, with 1 to 2% of cases dying because of this. But for those that lived, would suffer further down into their interior cingulate cortex, where a nagging sense of fear, anxiety, and paranoia would take over. So much so that people afflicted with the same process will actively go out and participate in activities with these like-minded people for discussions and/or arguments. 4 to 6 hours into their affliction, these developing groups of people that have conglomerated will have rushes of adrenaline and dopamine rush into their brains, and with this overflowing of dopamines, these infected will be able to identify one another and soon band together to commit very violent acts towards anyone without their exact mindset, even with the degradation and litany of other mental issues. When it gets to be between 6 to 15 hours after infection, those affected will be forming large groups who tend to show hostility to anyone not like them, withdrawing from any important people in their lives to become secluded so that they may have one-track-minded discussions involving socioeconomic, political, religion, and hypothetical inkling into the idea of an invasion by trans-dimensional humans, all seemingly a harmless clique. To anyone that's outside of this mental group, they might just seem like a harmless clique of the mentally degraded. That is until hour 15 to hour 30 kick off, where these infected become coordinated in their mentally derailing efforts to cause organized violence and even terrorism in city streets, where there will even be ritualistic cannibalism seen in the center of it all. Once they have made the local public into prisoners of their new war, they will give the non-infected people they capture one of two options. The first is liquidation, a form of ritualized execution in the most brutally painful ways, or through rectification by holding a blood transfusion between an infected to a non-infected in order to have the non-infected's brain degrade and become one of them. In the instance of a redacted town in Washington state, there was a bar brawl that turned into an armed outpost with fully armed police guard checking the outside of the bar until a bomb blew up, killing the officers, with the men inside the bar coming out saying they're going hunting for females. So either your brain craps out after the sign of the fog squid, you become violent enough to attack armed officers and have your head blown off, you become immolated or cannibalized by this sect, or just return to your normal self until you are arrested for your crimes and either given the death sentence, life in confinement, or the SCP euthanizes you to not allow this infection to go on any further, even if you are normal again. SCP-2301 If you are into cosplay or LARPing, well, your time to be a hero, antagonist, or a person with enough spandex to question your sexuality has come. 2301 is an entity that can change its size, shape, and abilities to anything it wishes monthly. These forms will most likely take the form of fictional or mythological antagonists pulled from Japanese or European origin. So anything from giant dragons that can breathe fire as hot as up to 1000 degrees Celsius to Onis that wield a kanabo powerful enough to crush a human chest clad in armor without breaking a sweat. 2301 will seek out the most densely populated areas nearest to it to cause as much death and destruction as it can. These physical apparitions cannot be harmed whatsoever unless it faces a person that plays the role of a character that typically defeats it completely. Meaning if 2301 were to suddenly become a dragon and ravage the landscape, full military efforts would be pointless and could do no damage to it. And instead, attaining hordes of LARPers dressed as medieval knights that think and speak as such would be the only way to retaliate. The SCP will retain any weaknesses the creature it turns into will have, so something like an easily pierceable underbelly can be exploited by these role-playing knights. Once and if SCP-2301 is defeated and killed, all attending role-playing personnel must stay in character until the very body of this SCP has been completely either decayed or been destroyed. If these people break character even slightly, not speaking, maneuvering, or acting as the character they portray, the form the SCP has taken will be completely revived to attack once more. Once it has been defeated and fully decayed, it will respawn as a completely different creature of folklore the next following month, meaning people nearby must be knowledgeable in a vast majority of fiction to not only discern the weaknesses of the new form, but how to act in its presence. Otherwise, this beast will be undefeatable. If this SCP were to pick a creature of folklore unknown to modern man, it could easily rule unopposed while researchers frantically tried to figure out its origins. Accordingly, if it expanded its lore-based origins to further Japanese or even American fiction, even more powerful and impossible means of making a formidable villain for it would happen. Can you imagine SCP-2301 becoming Majin Buu, absorbing and turning people into candy left and right, and having to make a person wear an orange gi to scream and artificially grow and color their hair? Or an evil version of Superman like Brightburn appearing and not being able to fight back at all since there is no worthy antagonist to defeat him because it's just a bleak scenario? 2301 would be an OP creature to go against. Do some memes bore you to death with oversharing?
Doesn't know the way. To know the way, you need to have Ebola.
Well, SCP-2304 will do just that, being a set of 14 images containing cognitohazardous properties. These images are commonly used and spread around like common internet memes, meaning because of how people like their trendy jokes of the week/month can be exposed to thousands, if not millions of people within a very short period of time before people move on to the next flavor of the month. In that time, any people that bared witness to the images in question will suddenly have the muscle cells in their throat grow horrendously fast, causing people to asphyxiate from their throat closing up. Some may survive, but a majority of individuals will die literally choking to death because they saw a funny internet meme, or as my 75-year-old coworker once called them, memes. SCP-2316 is a collective consciousness, harbored as numerous dead bodies floating in a certain lake. As to which lake, those details are redacted. The corpses will stay near each other at all times, and if you bear witness to these corpses, if you are able to see them, you will see them as people that you knew during your childhood. The sight of dead childhood companions, family members, or even traumatic individuals will compel you to enter the lake to go after them to either attempt to save them from a grim fate, or maybe just to even affirm their identities because you're in disbelief that they're even there. However, entering the lake completely will cause you, the affected individual, to disappear without a trace, never to be seen again, to be presumed either dead or a body for the SCP to utilize to draw in more people. Now, entering the world of a more popular and more familial than anything scenario, SCP-2317 is merely a wooden frame door that works just like the doors from Monsters, Inc. Except this movable doorway leads to a true world-ending danger, entering to an alternative dimension consisting solely of a desert made of salt, with the area directly in front adorned with 7 pillars in a circular formation. Under this minimalistic structure is an open area where a destructive leviathan that resembles a massive, obese horned cyclops of a beast-like human that can stand upwards of 20 kilometers tall, formerly known before its hibernation as the Devourer of Worlds. These 7 pillars have chains attached to them that bind the Devourer to its slumber, but over time, each chain, one by one, seems to break over time since their creation in 1894. Repairing them or creating new binding chains seems impossible for those that attempt to do so, as only the flesh and bone of a former Devourer is required to construct these, which no longer exist. There are no Devourers left in existence. Each pillar must also be anointed with a very specific and calculated ritual of holy water and sacrificing a chicken with a specified blade. If this ritual is not performed in a specific order or any mishap happens, a 1 kiloton nuclear device will be set as all personnel evacuate the site to slow down whatever destructive force the Devourer of Worlds is capable of. All personnel assigned to this job must have strict guidelines met, including being single with no children and devoutly follow the rules of the SCP organization, as well as being screened psychologically and mentally every 2 months to make sure they are not swayed emotionally to help SCP-2317 break its final chain. It's estimated that within the next 30 years, the last chain will finally rust and break, despite all efforts to prevent this from occurring, with details on how to combat the Devourer when it has awakened completely unknown, lost to the Urkishan mystics who sealed it away originally. So much like Thanos stating that he is inevitable, the Devourer is that, but with twice the results. There is nothing we can do and must wait for the eventual end of times when this SCP breaks his chains and awakens. Now, let's take a pause. Remember the Bee movie?
You like jazz?
Now, what if it didn't have a shit plot, one good jazz joke, and a girl wanting to fuck a bee, and instead of suing humanity over honey production, the bees infected humanity with a virus that deletes their consciousness and replaces it with a hive mind intelligence? SCP-2324 is just that, a type of honeybee that when it stings you directly, a parasitic infection will invade the body and shut down all major organs along the way, leading to the conversion of the brain to what is most like a beehive. The body they inhabit will behave normally, except will refer to itself as a warship for the Queen's Navy. These thusly dubbed warship bodies will produce newly mutated honeybees within your restructured brain, churning out hordes of hostile bees from various orifices like the mouth, nostrils, ears, and even butthole. Bees will be pouring out from all these holes. Imagine it as a veritable invasion of the body snatchers, but instead of regular people screeching at you to hunt you down, they release dozens of bees that will swarm you, sting you, and wipe you out, leaving only your hollowed out walking husk behind, to further create more bees until eventually a majority of humanity are warships, with bees finally getting revenge against mankind for their dwindling numbers. There is no vaccine, and if an Optimagas isn't free to kill the initial onset of bees, then the only option left is the nuclear option. No amount of jazz will stop these angry little thick-butted bastards.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
Going from bees wiping out humanity, let's go back to a more realistic scenario. SCP-2326 will suddenly appear somewhere in the northern Atlantic Ocean as Handley Page Victor strategic bombers that will stay on their predestined flight course, not responding to any radio communications. Most of them carry a number of high-power nuclear devices and weapons of up to 75 kilotons to unleash and devastate former Warsaw Pact industrial centers found in the Soviet Union, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania that may still contain payloads. These bombers are erratic and can sometimes attack each other, spiral out of control, and even destroy themselves. but do have a chance of destroying these centers with nuclear caches and the surrounding civilization being destroyed in the process as well, spurring what can be construed as an all-out attack from a different country that can spur a world war. Now, do you enjoy the sound of bugs buzzing around your ear? You know, that little... Do you like that? Well, SCP-2350 will oblige whether you like it or not, a sound audible to people as numerous mosquitoes buzzing around, specifically the swarm attacking you. This sound will double in decibels for the victim every 12 seconds, making them assume a large horde is upon them. This natural but really unnatural audio will have physical effects similar to an infestation attacking a person, leaving rashes and other inflammatory responses like bites on the flesh, while also administering typical diseases carried by mosquitoes like West Nile and malaria. It was used as an auditory weapon during the American conflicts against Vietnam and Korea, killing or driving out opposition over time, although apparently it can infect anyone as the sound persists somehow. Parts of the jungle of Vietnam still contain this sound to this day due to the extended conflict of the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975, and as shown, the parts it affects have all but killed off all plant life and driven off other wildlife from drawing anywhere near it. It was abandoned by the US Special Operations Division when the sound indiscriminately attacked both sides. This sound can happen in its elongated locations in the Vietnam jungles without any warning or reason. You can start hearing this sound without any reason for it existing. Meaning, if you are able to hear this either weaponized audio or it decides to just start blasting, you will break out in tons of rashes and miniature bites and lesions, then slowly succumb to a litany of insect-borne diseases like the Zika virus and yellow fever. And that's if the sound of increasing hordes of mosquitoes infinitely for the rest of your life doesn't drive you to suicide in the first place. SCP-2359 is a humanoid that no one knows the true identity or even appearance of, as anyone that merely makes any form of contact with them will have a cognito-hazardous infection take hold of their memories. The SCP in question will, in a varied but short amount of time, become an important person in the affected individual's life, but an entirely new persona that the SCP embedded into their own personal memories as if they had known each other since childhood. The bond that the SCP creates with the person becomes so deep that the individual will start to trust the SCP's actions enough to willingly go along with just about any crime committed, even assisting in murder. Any camera live feeds, photographs, and other means of recording or visuals can be altered to never reveal the SCP's location or identity. It's like it doesn't exist on any other form besides seeing it for yourself. It can also alter someone's perception of photography and video to include the SCP's image to prove its existence. But if someone confronts the affected individual providing secondhand evidence that disproves the SCP's existence in their life, the victim will suffer immediate brain hemorrhaging and die. So we are dealing with an unknown entity that can become an important figure that you didn't know beforehand but is now important in your life just by seeing it, talking with it, or even texting it, that can easily convince you to do dangerous acts that will put your life at risk, and if the details of its true purpose are revealed to you, will cause your brain to literally destroy itself, with you never knowing if a person you knew and loved was actually an SCP trying to manipulate you to its favor. Yep, even this is an SCP. SCP-236 is a collective of almost microscopic crabs that cluster together as a hive mind intelligence that becomes more intelligent and more aggressive the larger their numbers. They can bind together to pretend to be everyday physical inorganic objects like chairs, doors, and even paintings, even mimicking the look, pattern, and feel of their textures. Any nearby organic matter can and will be picked apart piece by tiny piece by their pincers and eaten alive, leading to them laying and hatching eggs that create more of these tiny crabby boys and girls. Being able to imitate normal objects means they can draw in people and animals without raising alarm. This SCP collective can panic and disperse when exposed to bright light, witness fast movement from a living thing, or when hearing really loud noises, with the swarm running in opposite directions when they scatter, diminishing their destructive capabilities as well as their intelligence. The less of them there are together, the less intelligent they are. It's pretty simple. If you are able to back either the entirety of the crab horde or their separate numbers into a corner, they will trigger a defensive response, wherein the numerous micro crabs will raise their pincers into the air and cause an explosion comparable to 20 pounds of C4, instantly eradicating those who frightened it. On top of that, if their prey is either asleep or immobilized where they cannot move, the crabs will enter through any orifice or hole in your body and slowly eat you from the inside out. A horde of crabs greedier than the Krusty Krab's manager that will act like the aliens of prey, waiting for you to draw near to swarm you and microscopically pick you apart. Attempting to scare them off may work, unless you trigger them and cancel their lives faster than internet mobs ever could, with a Killer Queen type explosion. SCP-2381 is yet another fungus, but with a focus on the phallic orientation of generic mushrooms. Being a discovered strain of the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae, I'm not going to try and pronounce that, is very contagious and indiscernible from non-hazardous strains until it has already infected a host through either liquids, direct contact, or even the air. The fungal yeast will spread a network of fibers throughout your body, converting cells into the yeast itself, taking over more and more of the body, creating deep, painful lesions on the points of contact as it invades the body's muscles and bloodstream to cause limbs to be basically paralyzed. The host's flesh will begin to convert outwardly and painfully, and eventually the host's genitals will split open in order for a toadstool that can grow up to 50 meters tall to grow out of this new hole down there and cause Pain Olympics levels of pain. This new genital splitting toadstool will release infectious spores as the host loses every memory they have before they eventually die. A hollowed out husk with a big mushroom to compensate for their lack of life. Basically, if The Last of Us's cordyceps brain infection made their own generic version of Viagra with a grocery list of symptoms that are glossed over, with the biggest one meaning you have a mushroom dick. But this time it's not going to be tiny. SCP-2385 is an intricate underground tunnel system with only one possible entry point above ground, with any attempts to burrow through to make a different entrance shown to be impossible. The tunnel system will frequently change its interlocking nature, shifting pathways and walls to make previous excursions and mapping mostly wasted. But the most terrifying aspect of these tunnels isn't the one-way ever-shifting dynamic, but the fact that it procreates long worm-like creatures with human heads that violently attack anything that moves. Doing so by constricting prey with their binding body and either consuming smaller prey whole or burrowing inside the bodies of larger prey to eat them from the inside out, with even larger versions of these creatures existing but actually being docile. Wandering in here either unknowingly or with intent will most likely lead you to becoming lost in this magical labyrinth, and most likely being eaten alive or strolling along in the darkened caves until you die of starvation and dehydration. SCP-2411 is a snub-nosed revolver with the simple inscription of "Internal Use Only" engraved where the serial number should be. How to activate its special ability is unknown, but to whomever may find it while also having homicidal intent could be the trigger. As the owner of the gun, those they show murderous intent to or even slight aggression to will suddenly die. The person they hate will suddenly be dead, with what appears to be gunshot wounds to the forehead, without even a bullet being fired, a noise being made, or the dead person in question not being anywhere near the closet murderer in their gun. Once this has occurred, the owner will commit suicide outside the use of a firearm, meaning they will not use a gun to off themselves. While authorities peg it as a mystery, it can be determined that anyone with a slight kindling to murder another that finds this weapon could have it internally cause a bullet-like wound to burrow out from the brain, and once this deed is done, will force the owner to off themselves. So either being instantly killed by someone that has a vendetta against you somewhere in the world, or dying by your own hand because your thirst for blood became so unquenchable there will be no satisfying your thirst, where even the Kool-Aid Man couldn't help you, and he is a cold-blooded assassin. I mean, really, he has ice cubes in his blood.
Oh no!
SCP-2440 is basically Dead Space's Necromorphs or Mass Effect's Reapers, but with a lot less flesh melding and a lot more collective extra-dimensional consciousness who can spread its influence through any types of communication, whether it be text, images, audio, or video, infecting the minds of anyone that encounters these forms of media of it with varying degrees of power and control over the bodies it infects. It can issue commands mentally to those that it has corrupted, but its effectiveness is completely dependent on the total number of people it has tainted. If within the minds of under 200 individuals, said individuals will have more interest in literature, photography, and film, even to the point of writing and recording media to share with others, even if they don't have those tendencies, just in order to spread the infection so more people will view their content. In the case of it infecting 201 to 500 people, the SCP can fully control the body of one host for half an hour to expand its reach more effectively, with more people becoming influencers. But, I mean, it's not as bad as current social media influencers, right? After 500 infections, it can fully control one host and use this new body to fully direct its new army of servants to do as it wishes beyond mental direction. Once it has passed 1,500 infected, the SCP can change the form of its new host as it pleases, becoming a shapeshifter with additional capabilities to bend reality around it to its will, with its legion only existing to create media that can spread the infection and nothing else. Infected individuals can be cured with anti-mimetic drugs dispersed by the organization, which the primary purpose of this drug isn't to completely cure it. It is not capable of doing that. However, it will give the host free will, although they will still hear the commands of the SCP, but it's up to them if they will follow them. However, once 10,000 people are under 2440's manipulation, the SCP can leave a host for up to an hour and directly control 1,000 individuals at once. Control meaning it has full control over the body, bending the body to its will and reality versus just manipulating the body to just spread the infection, with the anti-mimetic drug becoming completely ineffective in preventing this mind control. At the goal of 100,000 infected people, the SCP can create portals into other dimensions and create objects out of thin air. Once the SCP has passed 1 million followers, it can fully manifest itself in its true form, and it is predicted that its abilities to bend reality, connect to other worlds, and control the masses would easily end the world as we know it. Humanity would be completely wiped out. It's fair enough to see how just merely looking at something that references this SCP spreading the infection could easily create an army of content creators and media personalities that influence others to follow suit as the extra-dimensional being controls and destroys others as it sees fit. Anyone you watch that even talks about this or makes art of it could already put you under its spell. SCP-2442 is what appears to be a basic human that will speak to an unseen entity about a certain object or living thing. Within 12 hours, the target of its discussion with its apparent imaginary friend will simply disappear without a trace. In order to evade prosecution, it can create voices that respond to its discussion while also being manipulative enough to convince others to believe what it says. So basically, don't piss off this random person or they will talk to its invisible daddy to have you whacked out of existence. It's literally an imaginary friend that you will not see coming. SCP-2456. Let's just say if you have a friend or loved one that is obsessed with either star signs and astrology, is OCD over shapes, numbers, and patterns, and acts paranoid a majority of the time, you may want to avoid them here on out. A mimetic parasite dormant within 0.7% of the world's population, this parasite can trigger the host's body to enter a dormant state if they are stressfully triggered. This triggering will put them into a 3 to 4 day long sleep, experiencing cryptic lucid dreams where they interact and speak with prophets of the past being executed by a blade while celestial bodies dance in the sky above. Once they have awakened and talked about this dream, if they are not properly treated, they can fall back into a coma lasting between 6 days all the way to 6 years. Once awoken again from this coma for the final time, this person will begin to preach the gospel detailed as SCP-2456-A, which, once this gospel is audibly heard, can infect others into their beliefs, with a 70% success rate and more prone to infect people of heavy pre-existing religious beliefs. The prophet of this new SCP faith has the power to alter reality at its will depending on how many devout followers it has, while also encouraging their flock to violently and aggressively attack others who did not submit to their new religion, or to instruct followers who have waning faith to commit self-mutilation, something like seppuku. Followers will actively seek out uninfected individuals to either integrate them into their cult, or if they are refused, will simply outright murder you. You cannot deny this cult, or you will be dead. It is predicted that if 7% of the world's population were to fall under this sect, that the end of the world as we know it would follow suit, as the infection would pretty much be unstoppable, with this religious belief becoming a part of the herd mentality. If even further, the reality-shaping abilities of the original preacher himself will be enough to rip the fabric of space and time and literally destroy the universe. So you're looking at a star sign obsessed person entering a coma, coming back out, somehow convincing you to believe what they experienced in an acid-like fever dream, follow their every word to the point where you will kill someone else or hurt yourself for the doctrine, until enough people are behind your new leader that either the world bows to this new belief system that the world can no longer function, or that the leader gets so drunk on power that they destroy reality itself, because remember, they can alter reality once they get to that point. So we're pretty much screwed no matter what. SCP-2467. Is that a JoJo reference? Lol, in all seriousness, this SCP takes the form of an ocean-going ship labeled the DV Toluca. Although port records of a ship of this name and build have never been found, the areas within a 5-kilometer radius of this deep-sea faring vessel will experience winds of up to 125 kilometers per hour, billowing fogs and heavy rain, reducing vision quite heavily, and crashing waves extending up to 25 meters high, and in one case, 42 meters. That's 136 feet for us Americans. Most likely manipulated by this vessel to capsize passing by ships in order to acquire their cargo and, more importantly, their passengers. The Toluca, not only being able to control the weather, holds 75 passengers, all formerly abducted people from other boats, who, after 3 to 10 days of residing on the boat, will willfully man the vessel after mental subjugation, losing all semblance of their former self. Nearly a year after entering, you will be forced into this and then lose any kind of part of mind that you had. The people aboard this vessel will harvest anything they can get their hands on from other boats and ships, integrating cannons, hulls, and even anti-ship missiles like the MM-38 Exocet launchers. The fact that they can get their hands on this kind of military-grade shit? Damn! If you find yourself within this boat's radius, the Toluca can control weather in order to sink or capsize you, use its boatmen to either gun you down or control your mind and destroy who you are as a person, to be a mindless drone to constantly upgrade this boat to murder future victims. SCP-2468. Are you a fan of children? Well, you won't be after this SCP. Resembling a 9 to 10-year-old child covered in bruises and other injuries similar to abuse, intends to appear crying in the fetal position, begging for help in various languages in open parks and urban areas. When any type of organic life approaches it within 35 centimeters, the life form in question will suddenly levitate up 2 meters into the air, and both the SCP and person or animal will disintegrate into nothingness, with the SCP returning after 2 minutes, but the organic life never to be seen again. Well, not entirely, The only life to return after disappearing by this SCP's effects are creatures weighing at or less than 55 kilograms or 122 pounds. However, those that did return would either be completely catatonic or die within a short period of time after re-entry. The SCP will disappear with any organic flesh, even if it is just a slab of meat that is cooked, frozen, or even raw, and can be used to make the entity disappear for various times. But it will always return or seek out open populated areas. But why would it go to populated areas? Considering a lot of people will actively approach a crying and injured child to aid them, I wouldn't, because I've seen enough horror movies to know where that goes. Many moral people that will attempt to help this child in question will either meet a fate similar to, I really need to stop using this as a reference, but Thanos' negative side of the snap, where they disappear without a trace, or disappear and return in a near comatose state, or soon after die. SCP-2470 is a vague anomaly thought to be capable of ending the world due to its enigmatic presence. No living person knows what it looks like, but disappearances around the anomaly have at least pinpointed its approximate location. It is said to gain abstract knowledge and respond to anything it can perceive through sight and sound, and even an additional perception not revealed by SCP staff. Maybe something along the lines of a sixth sense? Oh.
I see dead people.
Basically, this void singularity that can perceive anything in objective reality can affect it, and once it does, anything it perceives, it can make slowly but surely fade from existence. If it can perceive you in any of the 5 senses and even the 6th sense, it can make you disappear. SCP units attempted to contain this threat by creating smoke screens in order to limit sight and potentially sound, but the void adapted and learned, and gradually eliminated all traces of the clouds of smoke by erasing their smoke from existence to reveal the identities of the units and perceive them, and thereafter wipe them out of existence. It is even shown to wipe out the mere dirt at our feet and the air we breathe to drop atmospheric pressure, and also widen out a crater in its place, looking like the after effects of an explosion. A special containment was made around it called Area 141 to limit further access to the entity, to not only prevent them being wiped from existence, but also to prevent the entity of SCP-2470 from furthering its knowledge of reality, with the possibility of it expanding and using its omnipresence to wipe the Earth from existence, or in the very least, make it uninhabitable by wiping out many forms of life. And we're getting to the last one for today. SCP-2490 is a strange creature with a body strewn together by multiple white jointed segments with jagged claws adorned on its orb-like hands, topped with a potato-like head with painted-on eyes. It can disguise itself mentally to other people, projecting in their thoughts that they're just another regular human, with it being tasked to identify and hunt people or groups of people throughout cities and countrysides. While stalking its prey, it can make itself easily noticeable, where the person that it is hunting will slowly start to see 2490's true form the more they see it and are being stalked. SCP-2490 will not attack their target for a while, and they will just stand there menacingly, and will continue this behavior for days or even months. Due to this abnormal figure constantly appearing in their life, the person can slowly degrade mentally, losing sleep, becoming paranoid, and having a deep-seated fear of mannequins. Because this thing in the distance constantly popping up, spectating you, that is going to freak your shit. When the time comes, 2490 will float slowly or scuttle to its target once it is ready to execute them, and even supposedly teleport freely in case the target traps them or they get behind a locked door or something of that nature. Once 2490 has teleported to their target and has them in their reach, its victims will be found with stab wounds to their skull, implying the SCP will always use its Wolverine-like claws to quickly end their victim's life, while also replacing some of the dead brain matter of the victim with liquid similar to a fluid secreted from the SCP's body. You'll be hunted for months on end as you literally go crazy, not knowing if a person that's next to you could be this image, and it's just constantly popping up in your life, and if you don't know if it's going to attack you or not, you don't know if it's a figment of your imagination. And when the puppet finally feels like doing it and finally decides to end this game of cat and mouse, will chase you down and easily assassinate you no matter where you are. If you get behind a door, if you get in a locked room, it will teleport there and quickly stab you in the brain and end your life, replacing your brain matter with whatever liquid is being secreted from its body. That about wraps up this look into the SCP Keter class numbers of 2001 to 2500. Like I said, this was originally supposed to get to 3000, but holy hell did it end up being a long endeavor. But don't worry, I'll get to 2500 to 3000 eventually. Did I get something wrong? Did I skip a Keter within this category of numbers that you really wanted me to read off? I'll get to your SCP of Keter variety when the time comes. So be patient and stop bringing up that certain 600 SCP. Like, comment, and sub for your grievances and adoration. Either or is fine, since comments of any nature are good for the YouTube algorithm. I've been enjoying doing the Why You Wouldn't Survive series for almost 2 years, but I'm needing a rest from heavily edited content creation, so I'll be taking a break soon from mainline content to do stuff on my other channel, Wow Such Gaming Streams, or WSG Streams, for a while. So make sure to sub to my other channel for streaming, gaming, and most of all, Left 4 Dead content. Sub to my good friend and editor Wisefish for game analysis and lore. He has a pretty good God of War mythology video. Donate in a number of ways to support the channel to be featured here, from being a longtime donator, Patreon patron, a YouTube member, or just donating during my live streams. Check out my previous SCP video or another Why You Wouldn't Survive video that you can click above. And I will see you guys after my month-long break. Never forget to stay well! Woohoo! I need a break.